and welcome to Coffee Break Blogging, where you'll learn to grow and monetize your blog in short, tactical installments you can use right away. Now here's the next episode in our series. Hello there, David Risley here, and welcome to another episode of Coffee Break Blogging. Today we're going to talk about how to accept credit cards on your blog. Definitely an important topic, and one that I know can be a little bit confusing. But before we jump in, I wanted to remind you that you can go over to coffeebreakblogging.com at any point. That's a shortcut into a particular page on my site at Blog Marketing Academy, and you can catch up on these episodes. So the way these episodes work is that we're going in a particular order, and it's a 7-stage process, and you can download an infographic which shows you all 7 stages over at coffeebreakblogging.com. Just look in the sidebar there. But you can also click on the button and to the full archives, and you can now go all the way back to episode 1, which it wasn't even called Coffee Break Blogging back then. It was called the Blog Program. But the only reason I mention this again is because we have had an issue here, especially on iTunes, which we're working on fixing right now, where we can only go back a certain number of episodes, and the rest of them were not showing up in the feed. But at the same time, I know a lot of people want to go back to the beginning and kind of go in chronological order because that's how this podcast works. So if you can still not get to this inside of iTunes, as far as going all the way back to the beginning, or especially go back to episode 30, then go over to coffeebreakblogging.com, click the button for the full archives, and you can now go all the way back to the beginning right there on the website and play catch up with us, okay? So with that being said, let's jump right into our topic, which is how to accept credit cards on your blog. Now, it should go without saying at this point that in order to sell anything on your site, you have to be able to take credit cards. Now, I want to make a mention about checks. Now, there are some people, more old school, who still like to write checks. They don't feel comfortable accepting credit or doing credit cards on the internet or what have you. As a merchant, as a seller, I would not even recommend bothering with checks. I used to do it back in the old days, and it's way more trouble than it's worth. The internet runs on credit cards. Okay, or debit cards, and it doesn't really matter what kind it is, but that's how the economy online works. You know that most likely, but I just wanted to make that one clear for anybody who might be listening who has either dealt with people who weren't comfortable with paying by credit card. I mean, my response to that is, in a very nice way, tough luck. I mean, I'm not going to take checks from anybody. It's just way more hassle than it's worth. And then, that's what I do. Okay. So let's jump into the 3 different methods to accept credit cards in your blog. And I kind of put this into 3 generic categories, and then we're going to talk about each one. The first one is the merchant account along with a gateway, and I'll describe those terminologies here in just a little bit. But basically, this is the more traditional way where you go to your bank and you set up a way to take credit cards and blah blah blah. They'll typically do a credit check and the whole thing. It is the most involved way to do it, but it's a lot more traditional in the fact that this is the way that it's been being done for a long time. Okay, so we'll talk about that in just a bit. The second method, I didn't exactly know what to call this, but for lack of a better word, I'm going to call it a payment processor. Now, that's a generic term, and some people might actually refer to a gateway as a payment processor. But what I'm referring to here are ways of accepting credit cards online where you actually don't really have a merchant account. It's different in the way that it works. This is actually the way that I do it now, and I'll go over that more in just a little bit. And then the third way is just, again, a generic umbrella that I'm calling it, and that's just third party. It's a third party processor of some kind, and this is where we would put PayPal and that type of thing. Okay, so I'm going to explain these, and if you're much more knowledgeable on this topic, you might take issue with what I've called those 3 generic categories, but I'm going to explain them now and why I've done it that way. So let's go back to the first one, which is a merchant account and a gateway. This is the traditional method of setting up the ability for your business to take credit cards. You would go either online and you search for the word merchant account or what have you. You'll find tons of providers for them. Or you can also go to your bank, and they will typically have a way of setting up a merchant account. Sometimes you'll find stores like I want to say I even saw Sam's Club one time offering this to their business members, a merchant account capability. Now, it's all basically run through a bank. And what you're basically getting for your business with a merchant account is a line of credit. Okay, that is essentially what you're getting. And for that reason, it also involves a credit check and some other things, some paperwork to get it set up. Though, if you're running a corporation, then what's going to happen is that they're going to get your social security number and all that stuff, and they're going to check your credit as the owner of it. And your terms on that merchant account in terms of how much you're going to pay, any money that they're going to withhold, blah, 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 is going to be dependent on your credit because they look at it as a potential risk. That's the way they look at it. It's a line of credit, and they're looking at it from a risk perspective, okay? So the merchant account is essentially that. It's a line of credit. Money is going to go into that little merchant account, and then it's going to get settled with your bank typically every single day. Well, at least Monday through Friday, okay? Now, how does your website interface with this merchant account that you set up? Well, that is where this thing called a gateway comes into mind, a payment gateway, okay? So the payment gateway acts as a middleman, so to speak, between your website and your merchant account. Now, the payment gateway is what does all the grunt work. It's what actually checks the credit card, checks the expiration dates. If you have address verification turned on, it'll check that to see if the address on file with that credit card matches up with what they've entered, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now you probably heard of this gateway because it's extremely popular. This is what a lot of people use, and that's called authorize.net. And if you go to authorize.net, you will find that what they are essentially a payment gateway. So what will happen is that authorize.net will be set up. You'll have an account with authorize.net, and it will be set up specifically to talk with your merchant account. Now, many times you don't actually need to individually sign up for authorize.net. Many merchant account providers will provide the gateway. And in some cases, they will actually hook you up with authorize.net. I know when I originally got my merchant account, they basically set me up with authorize.net themselves. So the hookup was already done, blah, 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 no big deal. Okay, so you'll probably, and very, very often we'll find that that's the case. And let's talk fees here because there definitely are fees associated with this. Now, you are going to pay a percentage of transaction, okay? Now, it averages in the high 2s to 3% of transactions. So if you charge somebody, let's say $100, you're going to pay $3 to the merchant account provider, okay? Now, there's also a flat rate on top of that. Now, that flat rate varies as well. Now, the whole thing about these fees with the merchant account is that the whole thing is generally negotiable, okay? Many times they will start out kind of high, especially depending on your credit. If they don't like your credit score, they will offer terms to you that are going to be higher than the average. They'll be higher than the 3% of a transaction, higher than 2.9. And you might not like that. Now, so you can negotiate with them. Another thing that people sometimes do, especially as they start processing more volume through a merchant account, is that they will call up their merchant account provider and be like, look, I'm running X amount of volume every month. We have not had, you can point out what your refund rates are and say that's really low risk and say, I want my fees to go down. And you can negotiate. And in fact, you can actually shop around. I've talked to some people who will actually shop around to different merchant account providers and be like, hey, can you offer me less than these other people? And you'll literally switch business. I mean, you can do that, okay? But that fee, that percentage of transaction is definitely negotiable, and in some cases can be higher than what you'll find in other places. And it's simply because they're looking at what their computers are telling them is the risk factor of doing business with you. Okay. Now, on top of these things, this percentage of transaction and the flat fee, there's also typically different account fees that go along with it just to keep your account active. And so I'll give you an example. Right now, I have a merchant account that I've had for years. It's with a company called PowerPay. I am currently not running any volume through it because I'm doing it in a different way. And I'm still paying that company. Off the top of my head, I think I'm paying them between $50 and $60 a month to literally have an inactive merchant account. Now I'm probably going to turn it off. I've had various opinions on whether I should just get rid of the darn thing. And some people are saying I might want to keep it as a fallback. It's really the only reason I'm still paying for it. But it goes to show that these account fees were just built into it. And so for that reason, a lot of times merchant account along with a gateway is going to cost more than some of these other options that we're talking about. Okay. Not only that, sometimes these merchant accounts will want to withhold a certain portion of your revenue for risk purposes. So basically, they, again, are judging the risk of your business, what you intend to sell, your credit score, stuff like that. And their computers tell them how much risk you are going to be. And then sometimes in order to minimize their risk, they will want to withhold a certain portion of your revenue, put it into a little account. It's not like it's their money, but they kind of hold it, and it's for risk purposes. So that if your customers come in and they do chargebacks, which is where they dispute the transaction or stuff like that, there's money there to cover those things by your merchant account provider. Okay. Typically, when you're just starting out and you don't have much of a track record, they're going to want to withhold a certain percentage of your revenue in order to build up that buffer. And they might have a higher percentage of transaction that they're going to want to keep. And then as you build up a little bit of a history with them, you can get those numbers down. Okay. Now, the last thing I want to mention, again, with regard to fees, is that the gateway is going to typically charge fees as well. And I was paying $10 a month for authorized.net on top of that. Now, it could be that your merchant account provider will have that all bundled in and you won't have to deal with that, but it's just something to keep in mind. And so as you can see, there are a fair amount of fees involved with a merchant account. Now, if you're running a lot of volume, it can definitely pay off. It could definitely pay off. If you're not running a lot of volume, if you're running just a few $1,000s a month in transactions or even less, then having a merchant account with a gateway can actually be kind of expensive. It can be kind of expensive, okay? And there are other ways to go, and I'm going to tell you about that right now. Another way to go is what I was calling the payment processor. Now, I might not be referring to this as the right thing, but basically it's a way to accept credit cards directly, very similarly to how a merchant account works, except that you don't actually have a merchant account. Now, the big one that you might have heard of, and these are the guys who I use personally now, is Stripe, stripe.com. Now, there are other ones out there, but Stripe is very, very popular. And basically, it's like having a merchant account. You accept credit cards on your blog. Now, the big thing with Stripe is that it doesn't provide a payment gateway like authorized.net. Like authorized.net will actually give you payment forms and all that if you want. With Stripe, you will need to integrate it with some form of software on your site to actually talk with Stripe. Now, that's not hard to do because a lot of the software that we talk about is designed right out the bat to talk with Stripe. So if you're selling with Member Mouse or Wishlist Member or many of the different shopping carts that are available that you can put on your blog, most of these things have the ability to talk with Stripe. You just enter a little code essentially, and it can process credit cards with Stripe. So it's really easy. In terms of fees, Stripe is very upfront about their fees. So it's not all this variable crap like you get with merchant accounts. It's 2.9% of the transaction and a 25-cent flat rate. Okay, so if you were to run a $100 transaction through Stripe, you're going to pay them $2.90 plus the 25 cents, which means, I guess, $3.15 is what you'll pay Stripe. You keep the rest of it. Now, the way these things work is that it goes into the account on Stripe, and then just like a merchant account on a Monday through Friday basis, it's going to settle with your bank. So you'll actually hook up Stripe to your bank account, and every single day it will settle. So whatever transactions that you collect on, say, a Monday are generally going to get settled to your account on Tuesday. And then typically within 1 or 2 days of that, it's available in your bank account. Nice and easy, okay? And then with Stripe, one of the reasons I like it is that there's no other fees involved. It's actually pretty simple in that regard. No weird account fees or any of that. So if you're doing lower volume and even up to some what you'd probably consider to be significant volume, Stripe is actually a great way to go. And I am a big fan of using Stripe over a merchant account these days. I think the internet's just matured. I don't think the whole merchant account setup has existed for a long time, like even before the internet. And now that things we're maturing on the internet itself, there's all these different payment systems that are becoming available. And Stripe is great. It's got a lot of advantages over a merchant account. Again, I think that the only time that a merchant account would probably save you money over Stripe is if you're running a lot of volume. If you're going to do some big launch and you're going to run, many thousands of dollars to it, or even a few $100,000 or something like that, well, then a merchant account probably makes a lot more sense than Stripe. Okay. But if you're running just a normal business where the revenue is fairly consistent and it's not huge, but hell, you could run tens of thousands of dollars a month through Stripe. It's going to do it just fine. So for most everybody listening to this, I think Stripe is going to be a good way to go. Okay. Now, the last category is what I refer to as third party, maybe not the best descriptor, but basically these are going to be the people like PayPal, like Gumroad, eJunkie. It's these all-in-one type things where the money, they process the credit card for you. It goes into a little account. Like in the case of PayPal, PayPal doesn't actually get deposited to your bank. It sits in your PayPal account. And if you want it in your bank, you got to manually do a transfer. Nothing wrong with that. It's the other way to go. And PayPal kind of operates like a bit of a bank in and of itself. Gumroad, it can deposit in different ways. There's different things that you can do. There's eJunkie and, these guys. They basically, that's a way to sell things on your blog. Those companies will do the middleman stuff. Okay. And then they handle the money in their own unique ways. And it's a way to go. And I want to mention PayPal here because I know a lot of bloggers will default to PayPal. They get PayPal, they understand PayPal, and they will just start using PayPal to sell things. And it's a way to go. Just realize in order to really grow your business well, I think that you're going to have to move beyond PayPal. Okay. I think that in order to really operate a business in the context of what I like to teach people to do, you need to be able to act like a real business. And that is you accept credit cards on your website. It's not difficult to do, and that's where Stripe comes in. You can use PayPal for that if you have the business side of it, but you're going to pay them, what is it, $30 a month or something like that to have that capability, and then you still got the transaction fees and all that. But it's a way to go. And then these other companies all work in their own unique way, okay? So let's end this thing off. I don't want to get too long. My recommendation for most of us is probably going to be in order to use a shopping cart system of some kind. And we're going to talk about that here in the next episode. And whether it be Wishlist Member or Member Mouse or WooCommerce or whatever you might be using to sell the stuff on your blog. But then in terms of the payment, I'm a big fan of Stripe. And that's just stripe.com. I think you should go check them out. Don't get scared of the way that it works. Like when they describe how it works in the features, you're going to see programming code on there and all kinds of stuff. You're not going to have to code things manually because most of the software that we would probably use on our sites to sell stuff, most of them they have built-in integration with Stripe. So it's really easy. In most cases, you are not going to have to worry about anything customized or any programming or anything like that to work with Stripe. It's pretty simple. And the process of signing up with Stripe, it's been a little while since I've done it, but it was pretty easy. I mean, you set it up. I think I entered my bank account information and it verified some stuff that way. And it was fairly A to B. I don't think it took me very long at all. certainly a hell of a lot easier than getting a merchant account. Okay. All right. So hopefully that was some helpful information on accepting credit cards on your blog. Definitely something you're going to need to do so that you can collect money. And speaking of money, if you want to know how to actually get people to buy stuff and how to actually set up your business in such a way where all this stuff about accepting credit cards is relevant, I want to invite you, if you've not been on it before, my big blog monetization webinar at blogmonetizationwebinar.com, where you can learn the entire business model that I teach. I literally walk you through it on screen and draw out the whole thing if you want to know the entire business model on how to monetize your blog and make serious money doing this. And we're not talking about banner ads and that stuff, because I don't like that kind of stuff. I'm talking about creating a real business out of your blog. I want you to join me. Pick a date and time which is convenient to you at blogmonetizationwebinar.com, and I'll see you there. Okay, thanks so much for listening to this episode of Coffee Break Blogging, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Coffee Break Blogging. If you like what you heard here today, we have something awesome we'd love to send you. It's called the Blog Conversion Guide, and it has 9 tweaks you can make to your blog in order to increase your conversion rate to get more opt-ins and sales. As one of our listeners, we'd love to give you access to this guide absolutely free. You can get your copy right now by going to coffeebreakblogging.com. Again, go to coffeebreakblogging.com to get your copy, and we'll see you next time.